Alright, welcome back, boys. Today's video is going to be very short. I just want to cover a very simple concept here. Don't use more space than necessary. So let me explain. I have a login form over here. This is very basic, just a basic example to illustrate what I mean. And the main thing you want to focus on is you don't want to use too much space here. So a lot of designers or a lot of developers, what they do is they try to fill up the screen, right? And sometimes you just don't have enough content to fill up the screen, right? Sometimes you just can't fill up the screen no matter what you do, but they try to fill up the screen and they kind of just force the content that they do have to just stretch until it fills up the screen. And that's bad practice. All right, every single element, every single component on your page has a best width, an ideal width, right? An ideal width where it looks best. So don't ruin that. Pick the ideal width and just stick with it. And do not feel forced to fill up the screen with content, right? Like as you can see over here, this is a very simple login form. It's constrained to about this much width. And as for the rest of the page, I'm not filling it with any kind of content, right? In a production setting, you could probably have like a navigation bar up here on the top, but that's about it, right? Maybe a footer, and yeah, that's it. As for the rest of the page, you would just fill it with this login form, right? So that's gonna be the main topic for this video. Don't use more space than necessary, and don't feel forced to fill up the page with content. If you want to see an example of what I mean over here, then let me show you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to let this remove the max width from this login card and just let it stretch to the page size, right? So let me show you what that looks like. So here you can see that I'm constraining it to a max width of 576 pixels. If I just remove this, right, and then I save it, see how terrible that looks? It's hideous, right? Because it's taking up so much space. We don't need it to take this much space, right? So this just looks horrible, right? So let me switch back to what we had before. Let me constrain it to a max width of 576 pixels, save that, and then go back. And now it looks great, right? So what you want to do is you want to use the ideal width where the component that you're using looks best, right? So every component has a width where it looks best. So pick that and just stick with it. And really, if there's no other content for you to fill up the page, then that's fine. Just center the component just like I have done over here and just use that, right? It's completely fine to have like an empty background, an empty page like that. You don't need to design so much and just fill the page with noise. Like as long as you have your main content on the page, you don't need to fill up the rest of the page with extra noise and whatever, right? You don't need to over design anything. So yeah, that's the main thing I want to teach you today. And on a related note, I want to show you another example. We're going to talk about CSS grids now, alright? So let me comment out this example and uncomment this one, a dark sidebar. And let's go back. So you may have seen this this design in a previous video of mine. I made a video like a couple videos back on how to create dark mode interfaces, which if you're interested in that, then go check that out as well. But basically this is like a to-do list app over here, and all I want to show you is the sidebar over here. So you can see this is a pretty good design in terms of spacing and layout, right? Like I would say so myself. This is a pretty good design in terms of spacing and layout. You can see that the sidebar here doesn't take up too much space, right? And the main content area takes up as much space as it can. That's how you want to do these things. That's exactly how you want to design a page like this. And the reason it works so well is because if I go in here, I'm constraining the sidebar to a width of 256 pixels. Not max width, but just the exact width, alright? So the sidebar will always be 256 pixels over here. Now the problem with grid system, let's recap how grids work in CSS. A grid system, if you're using like a 12 column grid, then it's going to divide your screen into equal columns, like 12 columns, each of 8.33% width, right? Or whatever the math is, I don't know. But around 8% per column, right? Now this can look fine on your screen, but there's always larger and larger screens and smaller screens, right? And on those screens, that 8% can be really small or really like large, right? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you how to use a grid system over here and why it's such a bad practice. All right, so let me just decrease my screen size over here first by just dragging this window over here. Now you can see it still looks fine, right? It still looks pretty good. But if I go over here and I change this from, like, change the whole layout from flex to grid, and I'll also give it, let's say, 4 columns, right? I'll give it 4 columns. I'll remove this width from the sidebar and just give it a column of 1, alright? So we have 4 total columns and the sidebar will take up 1 column. That means that the sidebar is going to take up 25% of the screen. That doesn't sound like a lot, right? But let me show you what happens. And over here, instead of grow, I'm going to have call span 3, right? There we go. Which means that the main content area is going to take up 75% of the screen, alright? So 25% of the screen goes to the sidebar and 75% goes to the main area. And again, this doesn't sound like a lot, right? And you can see over here, it looks pretty decent, right? Like, I mean, yeah, this looks great, right? The spacing looks fine, the layout looks fine, there's no real apparent issues over here, right? It seems fine that the sidebar should take up 25% of the screen. It doesn't sound like a lot, right? The content still gets 75% of the screen, which sounds like a lot, which, you know, it makes sense, right? But if I just full screen this, see that? See how large the sidebar gets? That's the problem over here. That's the problem with grid systems. If you're designing your page on your own normal sized screen, it might look good on your screen, right? But on a larger screen, it's just going to look horrible, right? Because grid systems are based on relative width, right? Again, in a 4-column grid like this one, 25% of the screen is going to become very large on large screens, obviously, right? So again, don't use more space than necessary. And the way to fix this is to only use the ideal width and no more and no less, alright? So I'll just undo all of these changes, save back, and there we go. Now it looks fine, right? So in this example, the sidebar doesn't really need to take up any more space than, let's say, 256 pixels that I have set over here, right? The sidebar doesn't need any more space than this. So I make sure to just set it to that width, no more, no less, right? And then no matter what the screen size is, even if I have the largest screen in the world, right? Even if I have NASA's screen, it doesn't matter, right? Because the sidebar is only going to be 256 pixels, exactly the width where it looks best. And then the content can take up the main area over here, right? And even in the content area, you can see that I'm not really stretching this tasks element over here, right? This entire tasks list over here, I'm not stretching it to fill up the entire screen, right? I'm centering it. I'm giving it the exact amount of width that it needs in order to look good. And then as for all of this empty background area, I don't do anything over there. I just keep it empty, right? And it still looks amazing, right? So don't stretch your elements needlessly. Use the best width for them, alright? Use the ideal width where they look best, and do not feel the need to fill up the screen with extra noise or stretch elements forcefully to fill up the screen, alright? You don't need to do any of those things. It's perfectly fine to have empty area like this, alright? In fact, it even looks clean, right? It looks like a clean, minimalist, like well-designed page even then, right? You don't need to fill it with extra noise. That's what I'm trying to teach you. So for all of your elements in your design, use the appropriate amount of width. Don't stretch them forcefully. Don't feel forced to fill up the screen with extra noise just to have some content lying around. Be perfectly okay with using a lot of white space, using a lot of like empty areas like this in the background. It's perfectly fine to do that. And be very, very careful with using grid systems, alright? Because when you're designing a page using a grid system, issues like this sidebar that I showed you over here, they don't really become apparent on your screen, right? But on a larger screen, they become really fucking horrible, right? So be very, very careful with how you use grid systems, and just be vigilant about where you're using grid systems. And just if an element has an appropriate width, right? where you don't want it to go past a certain amount of width, then just set a max width on it, right? Just set a width or a max width and just don't let it get any bigger than that, right? You don't have to use grids to style everything, right? You don't have to use grids to build your entire layout, right? You can just use width and max width, all right? Like, just remember that grids are based on, like CSS grid, it's based on relative width, right? So on larger screens, it's going to look really, really large, all right? So just be careful of that. Issues like that don't really become apparent on your regular screen sizes, but on a larger screen, like I just showed you here, it can get weird, right? So just be careful with that. Use the appropriate amount of space that each element needs, no more than that. Don't feel forced to fill up the screen, and be very careful with using CSS grid. That is all. That is my recap of everything we discussed in this video. Yeah, that's the end of the video, guys. Like, subscribe, do all of those things, drive up the algorithm for me and all that. And thank you for watching. And lastly, if you want to work with me or something, then my website will be linked below as always. So go send me a message, say hi, whatever. And thank you so much for watching. Bye bye. I love you all.